You know, I got a call about a week ago from Tim asking me to participate in this event, explaining to me where it was going to be, and that Leuren was going to be a co-speaker. And I have not met Leuren. I don't know anything about her background as an activist, and that was fine. And so then Tim called me up, sent me an email, explaining that somehow or another the location that we were going to be speaking in had disappeared. And he sent me a copy of the email message that they sent him, and I was greatly disturbed by that email message. And in response to it, I've crafted an opening statement that I'd like to read to you so you know exactly what's going on here this evening. I understand the venue for this event had to be changed from its original location because there was objection to either, and these were all in the email message, one, my being a speaker, or two, the subject matter to be addressed by either of the speakers, or three, both of these objections together. Regardless of what the problem was, I wish for the following to be perfectly clear. Until now, I have never met Leuren Moret, nor am I familiar with her work as an activist, and I am assuming, in fact I think it's true, that she too is also not familiar with my work as an activist. My speaking here with her does not mean that she endorses what I have to say, nor does it mean that I endorse what she has to say. We all have a right to address our concerns about nuclear power. This technology has been thrust into our midst, and it threatens the well-being of generations to come, all species included. Moreover, speaking against it is apparently threatening to some who would also stifle free speech. I am sorry for any inconvenience this change of location may have caused anyone here, including the event organizers. But I make no apology for what I stand for or the concerns that I am about to address. Thank you. I'm going to do something else that I have never done before. I'm going to conduct a survey, if you don't mind. It's going to be real quick. I'd like to know how many people here circulated or signed an initiative petition to close the Trojan Nuclear plant. Would you raise your hands? Thank you. How many of you voted to close Trojan? Thank you. Demonstrated or were arrested protesting at Trojan? Please stand up. I'd like people to see those who put their bodies on the line at Trojan. I'd like to know how many people here spoke at public hearings or other gatherings of people. Thank you. How many of you made financial contributions to organizations opposed to nuclear power? Thank you. And finally, how many of you shared with family, friends, neighbors, and fellow citizens your concerns about nuclear power? Yes, look at that, overwhelming. I want to thank each of you for what you have done to make that possible. That's the Trojan Tower going down when they exploded it. You have prevented a Fukushima-like event from occurring at Trojan. We can all sleep better at night because what we have done. But we're not done. We must use the example that we have set here, the perseverance that you all have carried over the years to address the challenges that we face in our future. Global warming, the resurgence of nuclear power, the existence of nuclear weapons, and the promotion of endless war, poverty, and injustice. Thank you again. Let's see here, I got to get the right button. We're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about Fukushima. I'm going to talk a little bit about Chernobyl. We've also talked already a little bit about Trojan, but I just want to remind you that the nuclear industry is a fuel cycle. And at every point in the fuel cycle, from mining, milling, enrichment, fuel fabrication, the power plant, the spent fuel storage, the high-level waste, the reprocessing, there are problems and there are radiation releases and there are pain and suffering of people who have been exposed to it. On March 11th, an earthquake occurred in Japan that affected 2 nuclear installations. You see them right there where the radiation symbols are. Fukushima 1 and 2. They're 6 miles apart from each other. There are 10 reactors there. 4 of them suffered great problems. They were hit by a tsunami that was 46 feet tall. The reactors were constructed on a bluff that was 13 feet above the ocean. You get the idea of what happened. Unit number 1 suffered a hydrogen explosion, and we had the beginning of the meltdowns. This is an aerial shot of the 4 reactors that to this day are still involved in that meltdown. Unit 1 is on the right. We're now looking at it from the ocean looking in. Unit number 2, unit number 1, of course, when the explosion took place, from the venting of hydrogen, which is created from the zirconium fuel cladding that was off-gassing hydrogen, exploded and blew the lid off of the secondary containment. Unit number 2 is pretty much looking intact, but it actually suffered tremendous damage because the hydrogen explosion that occurred here was inside the reactor vessel, and it broke the reactor vessel open, and they now believe that the fuel has melted down through the reactor vessel to the concrete floor underneath it. Unit number 3 is the only one of these complex of reactors that is burning plutonium fuel from recycled plutonium weapons. And because of that, it presents unique problems to the environment. And in fact, it's either Unit 3 or Unit 4, which Unit 4 is unusual because Unit 4, the spent fuel is not in the reactor vessel. It was all moved in November of 2010 to the spent fuel pool, and the spent fuel pool was dewatered, apparently releasing hydrogen again, blowing off the top of the building, and of course that now vents all the radioactive material, and they have apparently had to bulldoze areas of the site where the fuel has been blown out of the reactor vessel, deposited on the ground, and of course this is highly radioactive material. This is a schematic. You can get this on the internet. I made one little change to it. I added the spent fuel pool so you can see where it is. One of the problems with these Mark I GE boiling water reactors is that the spent fuel pool is right next to the reactor vessel. The reactor vessel has a steel shield around it with concrete, but the spent fuel pool is just open to the secondary containment, and that's a prefabricated metal building that's around the top of the building. That's not, it's just like the spent fuel pool was at Trojan. It's just a metal building. It's not, you know, this elaborate attempt to cover the reactor vessel and keep everything in. And of course, what's happened is with the dewatering of the reactor vessels, the dewatering of the spent fuel pools, this has led to the release of hydrogen, the burning of zirconium, and that's blown the lid off of everything, and that's why we are in the midst of the disaster that we're in today. Now, this is such a graphic photograph. This is the number 4 reactor. The green scaffolding that you see on the inside of there is the overhead crane that moves between the reactor vessel and the spent fuel pool to take out the used spent fuel assemblies and throw them into the pool. It's collapsed into the pool. And again, the whole magnitude, you know, you got to keep in mind, I've been a student of this technology for a number of years, and you know, the worst case accident that we all were confronted with by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the various experts that I've interviewed over the years was the possibility of a meltdown in a single reactor. Never, ever was it ever contemplated that you'd have 4 reactors going off all at once in the same location. I mean, this is, the magnitude of this is, everyone that I talk to is very heavily affected by this, people that are close to the industry. They've never seen anything like this. I mean, we're in a magnitude event that was never contemplated, except that I have to give credit to Leuren. She, in 2004, had an article published in the Japanese Times talking about the problems of building nuclear power plants where there were earthquakes. I read her article. I was very impressed. She, in a sense, is a prophet of what was to come and what we're now experiencing here at Fukushima. And of course, it would be nice. I wish that we could see radiation like this, you know? We could see the specter climbing out of the building when it floated over in the winds, the trade winds, and it ended up in our country, and everywhere it went, you had something that you can look at, touch, taste, and feel. But you don't have that with radioactive material. It's the perfect industrial pollutant. It is great for the industry because the victims are at great disadvantage to prove where it is that they got their exposures. And oh, by the way, you get your exposures, you don't immediately get a health effect unless it's of intense level of radiation. It can go years, and then you end up with a cancer or something, some organ that is going wrong, and you don't have a little flag that suddenly comes up in your organ and says, I got my radioactive isotope from Fukushima or Hanford or wherever. You just have a health problem. And you're not going to get the people that really caused your health problem to do something about it because they are not going to take on the cost of the damage that they are causing to the communities that we live in as a whole. They're not going to do it. And so really the only way that we have to protect ourselves against this is to shut them down, period. And we should have gotten out of it a long time ago. And unfortunately, we're going to turn another page in the drama, in the chapter. Now, at Fukushima, so far they've evacuated 336,000 people. I have attempted to keep a record of the various radiation problems that have happened, the vegetables and the fruit that have been radiated, the release of radioactive iodine. One of the things that kind of concerns me about this accident is they're limiting the analysis to only a few isotopes. They're not talking about the fact that the monitoring stations that did surround the plant failed when the tsunami happened, so there's really no way to know what immediately got out. They're also not really telling people the full health effect. They'll compare it with an airplane ride or something like that, but they're not really telling the truth in the sense that you and I have a way to protect ourselves. In order to protect ourselves from this pollutant, we all need our own radiological monitors, and we need them in a lot of different places. When Chernobyl went, there were hot spots that were miles away from Chernobyl that were as intense as what was at the reactor. How did they get that way? Where did that material come from? Why did it concentrate in that particular location? We're sitting ducks. We are sitting ducks to this accident. And as I said, I've been keeping an ongoing, I mean, now they're dumping radioactive material into the ocean. You can imagine what's going on in the food chain as that goes up the ocean. And again, how trusting are you of the people that are selling you the food that they have gotten from some location that may have in fact picked up this contamination? It's a real problem, and it's a huge problem. And of course, this is what one of the things I've been doing since this accident is collecting cartoons because they're such powerful statements. And this is a powerful one. Whatever the government has a face, TEPCO has a face, that's the Tokyo Electric Power Company. Our citizens are getting no more than an X-ray, so we're being transparent. Of course, the real heroes The real heroes at this nuclear plant are the Fukushima 50. These are the men and women who are being exposed to intense levels of radiation in an attempt to stop, or at least contain as best they can, what is going on there. And this cartoon, I think, really says it. Echoing Winston Churchill, never was so much owed by so many to so few. And of course, now we have the new worst case accident. Fukushima is the worst case accident now in the world. It's not Chernobyl. But Chernobyl has a lot to teach us. This is a book. I highly recommend that you get a copy of this book. And I have handed out flyers here, one of which is an attempt to share with you some information sources that you can go to on the internet for more information about Chernobyl. There's a number of people, the good guys and the bad guys, that are keeping a record of, a daily record of what's going on at the plant. And I invite you to take a copy of this. But I want to point out that on the back of here is an order form for this book. And I want to tell you the significance of this book. I was invited about a year and a half ago to debate a nuclear physicist by the name of Lloyd Marbet, who's one of these people that has had a new vision of nuclear power. He claims that at one time he was anti-nuclear, and now that he's seen the problems of global warming, he's pro-nuclear. And he began to do I began to do these back-to-back presentations with him, and he used a study that was done by the World Health Organization in 2006 that analyzed, the World Health Organization is the United Nations scientific body that examines health-related evidence, and they were making a claim that maybe 25 people were immediately killed by Chernobyl, and at most maybe 4,000 were going to be affected by it. Of course, what you don't know is how they did the study. One of the things that they did is they only used English-speaking scientists to gather the data. And this book, at the time this was going on, was written by Russians, Yablokov and the Nestorenko brothers. And they published this book in Russian in 2006. And of course, how many here can read Russian? We have one lucky person, because not a lot of us can. Anyway, they went to the New York Academy of Sciences to see if they could get their study published. Now this book represents 5,000 health studies that were done after the Chernobyl accident, showing that 400 million people were exposed to the radiation from Chernobyl. It dusted the northern hemisphere. That the 1987-2004 death toll is 824,000 people, and the accident is still going on. It's going to go on for generations. Friends, this is an introduction to Fukushima. Even though Chernobyl's a different accident, I'm not saying it's a different reactor design, it is, but it's a different accident because it blew a great deal of its radiation into the atmosphere. Fukushima did not have that type of explosion, but there's still a volume of radiation now in the ocean that is just circulating, and God knows where it ends up and who it ends up. So anyway, they went to the New York Academy of Sciences. We want to publish this book. At that time, the director entered into a contract with the authors. They hired Dr. Janet Sherman, who I'm going to talk a little bit more about, to edit the book. And then they published the book in the beginning of 2010. And I was very excited to see it. And I immediately went to Amazon, because you can get good book deals, and this book cost $150. And the reason why it cost $150 is because the only place you could get it was the New York Academy of Sciences. And what you don't know is that behind the scenes, after the contract was signed, a new director came into the New York Academy of Sciences and didn't want to publish the book. Only problem was they had a contract and they had to publish the book. So they only published 700 copies of the book. 700 copies of a major scientific study. Only 700 copies. It's amazing to me. And then, of course, they made it difficult for people to read the book. And that's the reason why I point out this application form for you, because if you want to get a printed version of the book, you can get it for $10 plus $2 shipping costs. Not a bad thing. You can go to the printer directly. It's right here on the back of this flyer. And by the way, if you don't have the money, I have gotten permission from the holders of the copyright to distribute the PDF file for free. So if you want a copy, email me. I'll send you a copy. Won't cost you a dime. And you'll have it. And not only that, you can give it to others. Because if there's anything that this ought to be teaching us, is that we're all first responders. And the only way that we're going to do something about this industry is if we educate ourselves and use the same tactics that we used at Trojan to shut down the nuclear power plants around us. We have to have the perseverance to continue, and we have to have the determination to educate in order to protect ourselves from the problems of this industry.
Is it in English now, Lloyd?
Pardon?
Is it in English now, Lloyd?
Yes, it's in English. When it was published by the New York Academy of Sciences, it's in English. I wouldn't be distributing a Russian language version, believe me. By the way, interesting analogy to this, though, how the accident continues. Remember, Chernobyl happened 25 years ago. The anniversary is coming up this month. Last year they had a major drought in Russia, had forest fires. This is the front page article in Russia Today, August 6th. Wildfires could spread the region irradiated by Chernobyl disaster. Emergencies Ministry warns of nuclear threat. I mean, it just regurgitates itself over and over again. And in fact, the cover of the Chernobyl book shows cut trees, which shows that the rings that were grown during and after the Chernobyl disaster are much different than what the trees had before the accident occurred. And this is the conclusionary statement that was made by the authors in that book, and I'd like to read it to you. The Chernobyl catastrophe demonstrates that the nuclear industry's willingness to risk the health of humanity and our environment with nuclear power plants will result, not only theoretically, but practically, in the same level of hazard as nuclear weapons. Think about that. Remember, we've been told that we'd have the peaceful atom and we'd beat the sword into a plowshare and it wouldn't cause the same kind of problems as nuclear weapons. But the health effects, they're being measured from Chernobyl, are beyond what we've experienced with nuclear weapons. That much intensity, and Fukushima is the next chapter. I like this because, you know, we've been looking at a lot of these disasters of late, and you all know Bill Nye, the science guy. When they had the Gulf oil explosion and the spill that spewed into the environment and is now killing dolphins and fish from the dispersants that were put into the water, they had a panel discussion on NPR, and I was watching it, and I was so blown away when I heard Bill Nye say this. Now, just one more thing. We have tens of thousands of coal-fired power plants around the world. We have thousands and thousands of oil and gas-fired power plants. We have about 434 nuclear power plants. Climate change is a huge problem. If we try to address our energy needs with nuclear power and we get into the tens of thousands of nuclear power plants, and that's what they want, by the way, we will have remarkable problems, astonishing problems. I hope this keeps everybody focused. They ended the interview really quick. Apparently, it could be something similar to having locations to speak at. I don't. Dr. Janet Sherman, I have great respect for. I consider it a great privilege to have met her and communicated with her. She has published a book called Life, Delicate Balance. I have some copies with me here. And of course, in her book, which covers all the various reasons why we have cancer in our environment, not just radiation, she asks this question: how many more of the world's people will suffer before we stop nuclear technology? She also, 6 months before Fukushima, wrote an article that she submitted for publication in which she said, Given profound weather effects, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, etc., human fallibility and military conflicts, it's only a matter of time before there's another catastrophe. Nuclear fallout knows no state or national boundaries. The economic costs of radioactive pollution and care of contaminated citizens are staggering. No country can maintain itself if its citizens are economically, intellectually, politically, and socially impoverished. They rejected the publication. You know, we have prophets in our midst, and we're not listening to them. I'm very close to the end of this, but I always like to read, you know, I don't usually show this slide when I do my PowerPoint presentation. That's what I do now. I travel around and do a PowerPoint presentation on global warming, nuclear power, and alternatives to both. And I never show these slides. Why don't I show these slides? Because invariably, there's always somebody in the audience that'll say to me, what about the American nuclear Navy? It's safe. Look at all those reactors we got in submarines, no problems. Everybody's happy. Of course, that's not true, but you know, again, it's one of these points that is always raised to try and throw at you. Well, the father, literally considered to be the father of the American nuclear Navy, was Admiral Hyman Rickover. And in 1982, he testified before Congress. And this is a portion of his testimony. And if you will allow, I'd like to read it to you, because it really says something about where we're at now. I'll be philosophical. This is Rickover. Until about 2 billion years ago, it was impossible to have any life on Earth. That is, there was so much radiation on Earth you couldn't have any life, fish, or anything. Gradually, about 2 billion years ago, the amount of radiation on this planet, and probably in the entire system, reduced and made it possible for some form of life to begin. Now, when we go back to using nuclear power, we're creating something which nature tried to destroy to make life possible. Every time you produce radiation, you produce something that has a certain half-life, in some cases for billions of years. I think the human race is going to wreck itself. And it is important that we get control of this horrible force and try to eliminate it. I do not believe that nuclear power is worth it if it creates radiation. And you might ask me, why do I have nuclear-powered ships? That is a necessary evil. I would sink them all. Hear the words. Prophets in our midst. Prophets in our midst. And perpetrators. This man was a perpetrator. And he admits at the end that this is not the way that we should be going. I have with me a very small amount of flyers this evening because, and I just want to tell you about this briefly. We have an operating nuclear power plant left in the Pacific Northwest, the Columbia Generating Station. That's their website. They are a boiling water reactor. Started up, I believe, in 1982. Has a license out to 2023. And guess what? This boiling water reactor is already applying for a 20-year extension to operate for 20 more years to 2043. I only have so many of these flyers, but if you're interested in getting involved in this, and you should get involved in it, it's our life we're talking about here, then I think you should pay attention to what's happening in our midst. And that basically is the end of my presentation. I don't want to take any more time away from Leuren, and again, I appreciate the invitation to be here. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. You need to switch in another computer, okay? Then I will disconnect, and hopefully we can make that happen. Thank you all.